Nicola is an experienced technology executive with an extensive background in innovative technology delivery, agile transformation, and organizational strategy. As a VP at Salesforce, she built the strongest enterprise agile program in the industry, encompassing more than 200 teams across both software and infrastructure, during a time when the company was tripling in size and growing their product lines fivefold. Nicola has worked for and consulted with companies as diverse as ThoughtWorks, Athena Health, Medium, eBay, Yahoo, Twitter, Siemens Medical, and British Telecom. Nicola is being recruited by Obama's White House, the days, and is an invited keynote speaker and was named one of the 21 rising technical superstars. So I'm very excited and very happy to be able to introduce to you now Nicola Dourambeis.
How was lunch? I will take all the woos I can get. Before we start, I'm going to give you a warning. We saw this amazing keynote this morning. Wasn't it great? Like, give them some love. And we had videos, we had dragons. I am here to talk to you about the grind. Because the truth of the matter is, many of us live our lives in the grind, and I certainly do. And before I get going, I just want to do a quick poll. How many people here have worked on an agile transformation? For those of you who don't know, it's almost everybody. How many of you have worked on one that took more than a year? More than 2 years? Keep your hands up. 3, 5. We still have some hands up. So, bless you people. This is the grind. And that's what I want to talk about. And I talk a lot about agile transformation because that's the area that I've been working in. And when Stacy invited me to come talk, I didn't have a prepared talk. I've spoken in the past about agile transformations that stick. I've spoken about cultural agility, and I didn't know what to talk about. And as I was trying to figure out what to talk about, I noticed a trend in my LinkedIn feed. And the trend was people debating what process to use. Do I use SAFE? Do I use DAD? Do I use LESS? Do I use name your friendly acronym? And I went, I don't think that's the right question, or what tool do you like the best? And for me, I thought that missed the point. And then similarly, I started getting these recruiting calls from recruiters offering me jobs that will take 2 years to transform an organization for very little money as an hourly wage. And I thought, that's weird too. So what I want to unpack is this idea of reaching agility. Because if the goal is reaching agility and we're talking about business agility, why aren't we done yet? And what's going on? And what's going on in the grind? So you already heard a lot about me. The only thing that I will add is I actually have a master's degree in sociology. And as a byproduct of that, I tend to really, really focus on the organization. However, I am a technologist because you can't get a job in sociology, so I had to teach myself how to code. But what I tend to do is try and understand the overall systemic issues in an organization, because most human beings want to do their best job every single day. And when they don't, it's because something's getting in their way, or some system, and that's what I'm most interested in. So 3 main areas that I want to dig into. And I feel so much better now that so many of you have participated in Agile transformation, because these might resonate with you. But first of all, what do we mean by it? And then I want to unpack 4 things that many of us have seen that make it really hard, and then give you some advice and lessons learned, and invite your questions and make this a little more of an interactive session. Cool? So to start, let me just give my less dynamic definition of business agility. But for me, how I explain it to teams, to companies, to leadership is the ability to respond to new opportunities or changes without losing momentum or vision. The truth of the matter is, I actually think a lot of companies are pretty good at mobilizing on an opportunity. They actually have this big thing they want to do, all hands on deck, we throw out all the rules, we create a SWAT team, a tiger team, a something team with a really great name, war rooms abound, and we get it done. But that's not business agility, because it's hard, it's tiring, and it's non-repeatable. What business agility, for me, is within your ecosystem, can you constantly inspect and adapt and pivot? Can you always seek new opportunities, not as a defensive, but as a means in which the way you work is your culture, is your ecosystem? That, to me, is business agility. So if you need a war room, this is not it. And my small public service announcement is, for those of you who think I'm going to give you a play-by-play, step-by-step on how to do Agile, you're not going to get that here. But I have some comfort for you. There's a lot of books, like a lot of books. I could have built about 20 more slides with a lot more books. This slide was inspired by the fact that, again, as I was researching what to talk to you about, I decided to email some of the pundits who have written these books to say, hey, have you seen this trend of these transformations that are never ending or rebooting and companies going over them over and over and over again? And I was hearing, yeah, I have. And I go, why do you think that is? And many of them told me to read their books. Well, cool. Read these books, but what you're not going to see in these books is why it doesn't work. What we have is a volume of really, really great plays, but not a good volume of what to do and why it might not work. And if this isn't enough, shoot, you can find almost 50 million hits on Google for Agile transformation with a ton of people who bought keywords, so I'm sure they know what they're doing. Or like your friendly Big Five consulting company that has built a stunning slide, and I'm sure many consultants are required, and this might be expensive. So my question is, if we have all this information, why are we still struggling? What's going on? So I have a theory of 4 main issues. And again, keep in mind, I look at the people problems because human beings don't react the same way processes and tools do. So my first issue that I see often is we don't understand the why. What problem are we trying to solve? How many of you have been asked by some friendly executive, often in engineering, I want Agile, can you do it? Make me Agile. Why? What do you want? Agile. What does that mean? Post-its? I'll buy you Post-its. I can buy you Post-its. What problem are you trying to solve? We're not fast. Why do you need to be fast? Because it's good. Cool. Where's your product team? Oh, no, they're not involved. All right, we got a problem here. So I don't like starting any transformation of anything. I don't care if it's Agile, I don't care if it's digital, I don't care if it's diet, without knowing the why and what problem we're trying to solve. So for me, we have to align on this understanding of why we are going to ask people to change. Because people do not like change. Change sucks. And I'm going to be even more explicit. I read this study that talked about patients who had had heart bypass surgery. And they interviewed a slew of these patients after 3 years of this surgery. And during this time, they had been given modifications to have with diet, with exercise, with removing stress, and all sorts of things. So you almost had a heart attack. You've had heart surgery. 3 years later, how many of them were doing these changes? Any guesses? 5%. You've read that study. You are 100% true. So 5%, 95% of the people went, crap, that sucks. This is way too hard. And this is life or death. This is not your job. So if we recognize that, how are we going to inspire them to make a change that feels good, that makes sense, that isn't a let's do Agile because it's good, or because this executive or that consultant told us to? And I want to differentiate, again, if we're just trying to install a process, actually that's kind of easy, it's known, read a book, there's a lot of them. But if you want to achieve this idea of business agility around the flow and the culture, and again, we talked a lot this morning about growth mindset. My premise is most people want to do their best work every single day. We hired them to, but there's a lot of things that are getting in their way and they can't. And they're frustrated. So they might be having all of the most amazing growth mindsets and leadership principles in the world, and they're still not able to achieve it. And now I'm going to ask them to move out of their safety zone where they've built their career with certain behaviors that have rewarded them and do something different. And I better have a good reason for that, because that is not safe. And they don't have their lives on the line. They just have their jobs on the line. So we have to first align on an understanding of what we want to achieve. So this is a narrative, and again, my context is I tend to work with enterprise, so I would love to say be hyper-customer focused. The truth is, in enterprise, most of the time, your customers are very, very diverse. They're paying a ton of money, and you're against contractual requirements. Or you're an IT shop, and your business units are there, so we're trying to help them. But generally, it's something like this. We want to predictably deliver because we've got a lot of teams. They have a lot of dependencies, and it's really difficult when we're not able to manage dependencies well. We want to deliver high quality because sometimes what happens with Agile is by going fast, we take shortcuts. And as we talked about this morning, there are no shortcuts. Customer value with happy teams. It's not just about the customer if our teams are getting up at 4:30 in the morning. So we kind of want some level of narrative that feels good for the sponsor, right, who wants it, and something good for the what's in it for me, for the human beings that are mostly going to be asked to do the change. And if we're able to do that, I believe the customer will always, always benefit, but I need to create the benefit for the human beings that are creating the change. So that's number one, the why. Number two, this one actually I see even more. We don't actually understand our entry point or baseline, and yet we're applying this one-size-fits-all solution. You will do safe. Well, okay, what's my business context? Why do I work this way? Why is it happening? And I'm just picking on safe. You will do scaled Scrum. You will do extreme programming. You will do lean. It doesn't matter what it is. And when you start to do that, what you are missing is people's history and what they're proud of and what they've succeeded at, because any company that is at a point of transformation is generally a company that has had a previous success. And we don't want to ignore that. And we don't want to be disrespectful of that, because that's where you start to get that push and pull resistance. Before I work with any company at a large scale, I spend a week with them. And if somebody doesn't want me to spend a week with them before I come in and implement whatever we're implementing, I won't work with them. And what do I do in this week? I talk to anywhere between 30 and 50 people, and I ask 4 questions. What do you do well that you're proud of? Question 2, what are your challenges? Question 3, what would you want to change? Question 4, if you could change one thing, what would it be? People are looking at me like, I thought we were here to talk about Scrum. I'm like, if you want to talk about Scrum, I'm down with that. But what do you do well as a company? If you tell me what we do really well as a company is we know our customers, we know how to work with them, we know how to make them happy, I want to build on that, because that's Agile. If you tell me what you do well is you know how to have each other's back, I want to build on that. Normally what people want to jump to is all the litany of issues that they recognize grate on their nerves. Our finance department doesn't fund us enough. It's super hard to hire. We have all of these processes. We have technical debt. Cool, we can talk about all of those things, but let's start by the things that you're proud of, because you've gotten to a place that's really important for us to recognize and honor. Then we can talk about all the stuff you want to do. And changes is not so hard. People will naturally give me all of those things, but just like all of us who talk about doing retrospectives, you don't want a solution too quickly. You really want to uncover it. And it's really fun to have these very open-ended conversations and then ask people to prioritize one thing because it goes into a bald silence. And the truth is, that's what we're asking our leadership to do all the time. And wouldn't it be great if everybody thought of the one main change to do in a similar fashion? And that way, as I start to build the narrative, it's not my words. It's not the words of a book. It's the words of the human beings that I'm going to have to bring together and win over their hearts and minds. So I think in order to transform, we have to understand where we are and how we got here, what we need to amplify, and it is much easier to amplify than to remove. Because people are proud of their work. They try their best. So what can we build on and amplify, and then what do we need to change? And what I've found by doing this is, while there's always common patterns, every single company is different. They have different people, they have different companies. Even when I think it's going to be the same, because I have these preliminary conversations with somebody that wants some transformation and it always sounds the same, these conversations unpack and uncover different things. And I'm going to actually give you 3 examples. These are eye chart slides, so I'm not going to go through every single thing of them. But I want to show you sort of a lens of it. Now, as Carl said in the intro, I come from Salesforce. I was Salesforce's first Agile hire. And when I came to Salesforce, they had already implemented Scrum 2 years earlier with the help of consultants, and they had overcome some really big problems that they had. The reason why Salesforce moved to Scrum was they got stuck. They had been in this pattern of delivering quarterly to customers, and in enterprise, that's massive and amazing, and all of a sudden they couldn't deliver anymore. They had a ton of dependencies, they were having outages, so they were in crisis mode, and they were having attrition because nobody wants to work in that area. San Francisco has a ton of jobs, so if your folks aren't happy, your folks find the door. So they implemented Scrum, and they took away this scope has to be locked, and all of a sudden they started to deliver more easily because the pressure to know every single thing you're going to do was removed. They were told to focus on quality. Whatever you build, just make it awesome, and it started to build momentum. So when I came in, what did I have to do? Everything was locked and loaded. We're all good, right? We're cool. But it was an interesting time for the company because in 2008, if you recall what was happening within the recession, Salesforce had previously been selling to business units and companies under the guise that their IT shops were incompetent and Salesforce was going to save the day. But in 2008, those budgets went away and they had to learn how to sell to IT. And guess what? IT didn't want to be called incompetent. So even every single ecosystem of the company, the sales organization, the customer support organization, had to change the way they thought about business. So it was a really, really interesting time. It wasn't just for us in tech and products. Moreover, we were already 4th quadrant in products, and it was the first time that Salesforce was going to introduce new products, which right now they have like a lot. So it was the very first time we did a big acquisition, had to figure out how not to Borg them and kill them and make them run away, but really integrate it, which brought in new cultures, new people. So that's what I found. But that seemed like a pretty cool challenge, and I took the job. But in fact, what I found was really static, boring Scrum all over the place. Open a book, here's what they were doing. 1-month waterfalls. First week, design requirements. 2 weeks, engineering. 4th week, test. That's not Agile. They actually didn't know what to do in Agile because nobody had ever taught them. The other thing that was very, very clear to me is Salesforce was really top-down. Now, the executives were brilliant, so top-down really worked for them, but it sure as heck was not going to scale. So while there was this really great success story that I got to benefit from, I didn't think they were ever going to be able to scale. The leaders weren't going to be able to scale. The teams were running out of time continuously. And honestly, the joy wasn't really there in a resonant way. The engineers loved it. They were happy. That's kind of it. The product people weren't super happy. The quality engineers weren't super happy. The engineers were really, really happy because they got like whatever they wanted. So as we looked at this transformation, for me, my goal was I have to teach them Agile, not doing Agile, being Agile. I have to teach them about the importance of working as a team. I have to teach them the importance of removing waste from the system, which was the handoff week to week to week, is waste. I have to teach them to really connect people to the customer need, and it not just being a requirement, but it actually being a human being who's benefiting it, not because the product team doesn't know, but because the engineers don't care. And it's not nearly as exciting as working in consumer, where you might actually do it. I don't have gamers. We're selling salespeople software, woo. I need to connect them to this visceral idea that what I've built helps somebody. So that was the values and principles. I also needed to build up my middle management, which in fact was non-existent. And the reason I had to do that is that's the only way I could get the leaders to let go. Because the middle management would scale. We know how to do that. Those leaders would not. So that was another big piece of it. And we had to improve predictability because the dependencies were getting larger and larger and larger because we kept exploding teams. And when you have a lot of teams, you often have component teams that require the help of other component teams to get things done. So what did we do? We did real Agile training, not sort of giving people a Scrum book, around values and principles, and everybody went to it as a whole team so that we could connect them. Now, the one thing about training, and I lean on training very heavily because I'm there to sell a hearts and minds vision and not teach mechanics. Mechanics are easily learned, but viscerally get people to work together as a team and to collaborate. And I need leaders to see that. I remember one class I had a VP in the class who had mostly been on his iPhone for the time, look up at me at some point and say, "How do I make them faster?" And I looked at him and I said, "What obstacles are you removing?" Because that's how you make them faster, right? What can you get out of their way? Are they missing something? And he just thought I was being sarcastic. I was not being sarcastic. So we had to really kind of get people to understand that piece of it. Then we had to put in a lightweight global planning framework because people weren't aligned and coordinated, and we just needed that. Now, the big piece around this thing, and actually was hugely unpopular, so take it for that, was we have global sprint reviews at Salesforce, which means once a month, everybody does a show and tell. People think this is crazy. It's like, how long does it take? Can this possibly scale? No, you do it anyway. Because by having this 1 month ability to see what teams were doing, we could let go of every single team has to do a 2-week sprint, which was one of those weird rules I sometimes see in companies where like once a month come up for air, show us what you did. If you guys want to work on 1-month sprints, probably not a great idea, but you do you. If you want to work on 2 weeks, if you want to work on 1 week, we don't care. You guys own that. Because as much as possible, what we wanted to do was push the absolute detail of the mechanics and the process into teams to afford them a lot more decision-making and autonomy. And I had to get those executives to let go from micromanaging the heck out of the key teams. So this was my negotiation, okay? So, moving on. Alpha company, different company, also 20-year-old company. So when I first went there, it felt like Salesforce to me, and I was really, really excited to work with them culturally. It was super dynamic. They had this teach and learn. They had also had this really great industry history where they were making loads of money, but strategically, actually, the market was consolidating on them. What had served them in the past was going away, and they needed to both invest in new products and recognize what we did before is not going to work, even though it's been working for 20 years. And they had no idea how to make change as an organization because they never had to. And it was super startup-y, but very much like we're so unique, we invent everything, including roles. So we don't have product management. We have very junior people taking requirements for customers and implementing them. And we want to save money, so we actually outsource all of our testing to human beings in India. So the human beings who are building this stuff never feel accountable and actually don't know when it's in the customer's hands. Like, there was a bunch of really big boulders that we had to unpack. So we needed product management, we needed quality engineering, and quality built into the teams. In fact, we never actually did quality engineering. We just asked the devs to do that. And they had all these funky, weird hybrid roles because they had this view that in order to grow, you needed to be T-shaped. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with T-shaped. It means be kind of a little bit good at everything. So you couldn't actually be a manager or an individual contributor. You had to be both because that actually showed growth. And people don't actually respond that well to that because nobody's good at everything. So we had to carve out different paths for people to be excellent and to grow inside that. And build a strategic roadmap, which required product management, because the truth is, the current roadmap was going to lead them into not a very good place. So what did we do? Built product management, changed quality engineering, tucked in a bunch of automation, rolled out Scrum, changed the entire org structure. And the one piece that I want to call out on this, which is kind of cool, we changed the funding model. Before in that company, they had been funding engineering. You get all this headcount. You know what? Like, the loudest person got the most headcount. So then we're not going to have enough designers because they weren't needed, and could we just hire a bunch more devs? We changed the entire structure so that we were funding whole teams, and you couldn't have a team without those pieces, which was really cool. It's the only place I've actually ever seen do that. And we slowed down deployment, which doesn't sound agile at all, but the truth is the deployments were really rough, and customers were having outages, and they were often unhappy. So instead of having unhappy customers, 7 times a month, maybe we might want to slow things down and build things better, and really also take a look at what we were building. So with that, one more, I promise. And this is not a 20-year-old company, but it is still enterprise. And it's a company I'm working with right now. So this company is going to IPO in a couple of years. They've actually really hit on something. They're a unicorn in the speak of venture capitalism. They have $1 billion valuation plus. They're in a market that is unique, and they've gotten leadership that has dominated from a customer perspective, which sounds really cool. I spoke to their SVP of engineering, and he was one of the most agile thinkers I had met ever. And not like agile like I've read the book, like agile deep in my belly. I understand. I want to push decision-making down. I want to afford people autonomy to make decisions. I feel like this is really important and impactful, and I loved him, and I gave him a hug the first time I met him. Slightly awkward, don't do that. And he had made a lot of really modern technology choices. So I didn't know why they wanted me. Sounded pretty darn good. And then when I asked him if his product counterpart was on board with me going in to talk to all of the product managers, he was like, oh, you want to talk to product managers? First tip, things might not be all that good. But he was cool. I talked to him too. And I had this conversation. And what I found in this week is while they were really agile, and there were a ton of agile mechanics, they were siloed. At the end of every planning meeting, every single dev took a story and worked on it and never talked to each other again. The designers weren't integrated in the team. They had this big handoff. And they had a design leader who was trying to locally optimize to output a factory of designs versus understanding what customer problems there were and how we were going to delight them. They had two types of priorities, 1 and 2. 1 needed to get done. There was all of this stuff that, in fact, the leaders didn't even recognize. So what did we do for them? Well, I'm building up the Scrum Master role. And I feel like the Scrum Master role is the unsung hero on the team to help them work as a team. When I see a team without a Scrum Master, I often see all of these individual threads of work happening, but not human beings who look at each other and talk to each other and try and help. So I need a Scrum Master role in that. I don't care that the dev leads do that on the side. And I really need them to understand the goal of this team is not to deliver stories, but to build awesome stuff for customers. So they have to know who the customers are, understand how they work, and want to help them. And I create the innovation ideation with every single human being on the team. So I also saw all these 2-person teams all over the place because they just want a lot done. Those 2-person teams deliver nothing. So we had to do some work around that. We had to force rank prioritize this, like priority 1, priority 2 stuff doesn't help anybody. And in fact, it's so interesting because when I talk to the leadership teams, they don't expect it, right? They're like, oh, well, just tell us what you can do. The teams actually don't understand it. So we're working around that, and then we're creating standards and patterns. So while this SVP of engineering was really glorious and wanting to give people autonomy, I have probably 12 different technologies in place because every time an engineer gets bored, he brings in a new technology. And then they leave. And now I got a lot of stuff nobody knows how to build or support, and I'm starting to have outages. So while that was really, really great when you were a startup and you wanted to be fast, it is completely unsustainable. So now, and it's hard because when I asked people, what do you do well and what are you proud of? So many people said autonomy. And now I've got to come to them and say, I get you like this technology and it really does solve this very unique problem, but you're the only person who knows it and we have to take it away. There are 4, choose from 4. It's not 1, it's gonna suck a little bit. We're sorry, we can justify it. So 3 different companies, all doing Agile transformation. My playbook is different from each of them. Sometimes you see similarities. I lean on training a lot because for me it's information. And what we always learned in Agile is if we want people to be empowered, they all need to be on the same page. And I have to flatten everything. And the only way I can do that is telling everybody the same thing so that they can all interpret it with their knowledge and their own understanding. It always felt very, very unfair to ask a couple of people on a team to go to training and then teach the whole team. That's like, all right, Nicola, we want you to learn how to play soccer. There's Megan Rapinoe. She's going to teach you for 2 days. Now teach everybody. I don't know. And she's great. I'm not going to learn it. So let's get everybody on the same page because they're all going to come in with their own interpretation. And the truth is, the process doesn't matter as much as the team coming up with their own working agreements around how they want to work as a team and them negotiating it. And that's how you build trust. It is not, and in fact, it was great because as I was at Salesforce, it started to get a pretty good reputation around the enterprise agility stuff. And I would sometimes bring in a new coach. And I always kept my coaching teams really, really small, much like what we heard this morning. I don't think that large teams of coaches are always as helpful as trying to make the human beings who have to do the work the coaches internally. So my Scrum Masters are my coaches, not external people, but my coaches are there to help unlock and sort of progress. So my teams are small. And I remember hiring in a new coach, and he went to look at new teams, and he was like, man, they do really sucky Scrum. How can that be? Like, I kept like reading articles about them being awesome. And I'm like, because Scrum's not the point. I don't care how beautiful their process is. I can show you the teams that are closer to the customer have better Scrum generally. And the teams that are lower in the stack, sort of building search and those capabilities, are a lot looser. I don't care. What I do care is they, as a team, understand how to work together. They work as a team. They incrementally deliver to customers. They're trying to see how well they're doing. And they're iterating and they're adapting and they're improving. That I care about. If that meeting sucks, I'm sorry, don't go anymore. Or ask them if they need help. They might not want your help. So that was sort of the standards and practices. And I put this slide up around outcomes, and we talked about outcomes earlier. I have to confess to you, measurements scare me. Because I work with people, and what I have learned is people will do what is measured. So if you come in really, really early with measurements, people learn very quickly how to game the measurements. You've seen this with velocity, right? Oh, my velocity has to be X, so I'm just going to game all my estimates to fit into that velocity. Does that mean I'm delivering better? I have no idea. And by the way, do customers really want like 17 ways to solve that one problem? Or maybe they want that one problem solved 17 different times because that's the number of times it took to actually solve the problem for real. So measurements scare me, but we need them. Again, if I'm measuring, and I'm going to go back to my sort of last example, my beta company, about this sort of collaboration thing. If I want to measure whether I've nailed this idea of teamwork and those teams working together, I might be measuring something around work in progress. Because work in progress is a signal that is going to show me if I have a lot of concurrency going on or if they work as a team. I'm not going to measure velocity or who's working on what, because the team should have the authority to do that. So I've got to figure out what the key outcome level measurements are to help people signal it. And if I can think of a countermeasure that's going to prevent gaming, all the better. So an example is, I remember when I started working with this alpha company, and we told them to slow down to build better quality, as I described. All of a sudden, they started delivering less stuff. So people started to say, hey, this agile transformation isn't going so well because they're delivering less stuff. And sure, before our releases were rockier and we've improved quality, but we don't really know if that has to do with this agile stuff. Our customers are getting less stuff. So in reaction to that, I made this comment that I regretted so many times, so please forgive me. I was like, you know, at Salesforce, we had this idea roughly that every single release, and imagine a release being in a quarter, like a team builds one feature a release. So at Salesforce, the way this worked out was, if we want to have a big release with about 20 things, we roughly in our head thought it would be about 20 teams. It didn't mean every team delivers a feature because, again, component teams, some teams deliver a lot, some teams really satisfy dependencies, but that was our rough thing. And then that got out. And now everybody started building little crappy features that nobody wanted. My fault. But that was the measurement that they got. Success means one feature per release. And because I want to be good and I want to meet that measurement, and I care about my job, and I am a good person, I am not trying to game it, I'm going to satisfy this measure, and I'm going to pick the lowest risk feature, the easiest one to deliver, so that I've nailed that metric. Did this make my customers happy? No, they just got like inundated by all these tiny minutia features that didn't serve any value. So it's the problem with measurements that always makes me uncomfortable. It's why I wait probably too long, almost irresponsibly too long around it. And I think we have to know, again, because you recall my very first issue is we don't understand the why. My very second issue is we don't actually know what we're doing for the company in their history. And I need some way to correlate that and the outcomes. And This is also a bit of a reaction to the fact that there was a period of time that I was working with companies and somebody would show me a really beautiful chart that showed all the human beings that had been trained and all the teams that had launched and were doing all this checklist of mechanics, and they were high-fiving, saying, "We're done." And when I talked to the people, they would tell me about their crappy experience, about how it wasn't agile, how it was all top-down, or a litany of issues. So the output, which is all these human beings being trained, didn't meet the outcome around delivering better customer value with happier teams. So I put this up, but I confess to you, I'm not good at this, but I still think it's really, really important. 3, we underestimate the challenge of people, mindset, or culture transformation. Every single article I read about any transformation, digital transformation, that talks about mindset or culture or people, like, oh, it's a check, I can do that. I've finished the people transformation, it's done. And, Ray, remember that Agile Manifesto? For those of you who don't know, that's the Agile Manifesto. Even though we know it's about people, a bunch of these transformations, if you actually look at the guts of what they're doing, is the implementation of a tool or a process. But that has nothing to do with the people. Further, oftentimes I've seen the person tasked with leading or managing the transformation is pretty junior in the organization. And they have to operate under constraints. Oh, I know we don't have clear priorities. I can't get my executive team to prioritize. So what I'm going to do is create a complex process to rationalize the priorities so that teams get what they need. Well, why don't you just tell the execs to prioritize? Which, by the way, in Alpha Company we did, he came up with 57 priority number ones. That is too many. You know why he came up with 57? How many teams do you think we had? 57. We wanted everybody to feel special. So if you're going to do a people transformation, generally it needs to be done by the most senior person to lead it, to hear it, to understand the trade-offs, because oftentimes the trade-offs that are made are theirs. And in defense of them, because I have been a VP, you don't always get real information around what's going on. Like, the person who came up with 57 priorities wasn't doing it to be sarcastic. He was doing it to motivate people. And then somebody had to come to him, me, and say, hey, do your customers want 57 priorities? What do they need? But what about these teams that aren't going to like it and they're going to be told that what they're doing doesn't matter? Well, then why do we have those teams? Oh, shoot, that's a hard conversation to have. But that's a conversation we have to have, which, by the way, doesn't mean we're firing them, because those teams that are working on something that doesn't matter, they know. They're just not super motivated. So we can action them, we can amplify them, we can activate them, but we also have to be really honest. So I'm not trying to criticize anybody who is running this. What I do want to recognize is the complexity of people change is very, very high, which doesn't even mean any of us will succeed in every single context, right? We see large changes that fail because we can't mobilize the people and get them on board. But I know if it is somebody more senior, they're going to have more tools in their toolkit that might make a difference. So doing Agile does not mean becoming Agile. And this is a sheep on purpose, right? Like the sheep all follow each other. I just really like this picture. It makes me happy. What works on one, and this sucks, because what works on one team doesn't always work on another, because the human beings are different. And gosh, that's annoying. I worked with one Scrum Master who was amazing. I watched her. I had seen a team working at a really slow pace. And when she got to work with them, she got them so excited and so on track, their productivity increased significantly, doubled. And we were like, whoa, this woman is amazing. She's the dream Scrum Master. We have this other team over here. That team is troubled. We're going to put her in on her super person cape and jump in. That team hated her. They thought she was a micromanager. She didn't give them any autonomy. It is really, really tough because human beings are different and you have to sort of unpack and get to know them and understand it. And if you can't, it is very easy to get stuck or ignore it or just say bad team and not know how to pivot and work in it. Which is why you kind of want to lean on experimentation. You want to lean on really working through the relationships over working through process application. And then the fourth issue, and I know I should have three. I usually like to do three, but there was one more. We expect there to be an endpoint when we are transformed. Capital T. Ah, done. Plan's over, we're transformed. But the business should be constantly changing, right? So how are we transformed? How have we done it? Now, maybe we've achieved this ecosystem of business agility that I talked about earlier, or maybe in this circumstance, following these challenges, we've got it figured out, and maybe things are going to change. Because what I find is at a certain point, you often see a backslide. The things that worked last year aren't working anymore, and we're doing the same things. That sucks, because it felt so good, right? Because it was really hard, we did the grind, we got out, and now we gotta do it again? And then I go back to sort of how I started this, where I was talking about these transformations that last forever, and I started to question myself, because I was maybe a little judgy about these transformations, and maybe they should last forever. So as I sought wisdom from some of these Agile pundits, one said to me, Diana Larson, who has written a brilliant book on retrospectives and works in Agile fluency, and I'm quoting her right here, she said, agility isn't the point, and it isn't an end. It's a means to a never-ending transition to a better and better state. Which I liked. Because if this slide were to go further, maybe I would see somebody on a hoverboard flying. Like, there isn't an end because our business isn't going to end. So, 4 issues, 4 big things. What do we do? Now, I mentioned I wasn't going to give you a playbook. I'm going to give you a bit of a playbook. But my playbook is going to be different. So having worked with a bunch of different organizations over time, there are things that I lean in to, and I want to share them with you. So first off, use Agile to deliver Agile. We know this, but I have seen 2-year plans to become Agile, like that recruiter called me about. You go in for 2 years, they will be Agile. I'm like, why don't you give me all that money and I could do it in 6 months? I really thought he was going to go for it, too. It didn't work. So I have to start with the people over process. So I have to start with understanding the why and aligning leaders. I do top down and bottom up, but the truth is, usually getting the bottom to cooperate, if I can come up with a narrative that resonates with them, is easier than getting the executive team to align on something, because their behavior will have to change. And they're the people with the most at stake because they have built a very, very successful career with that behavior. The other thing to note is oftentimes they don't get real information. So I was working with one CEO of a public company, and he had had a leader on his team, the CTO, who was ultimately fired, who pushed teams really, really hard, who asked them to work very, very long hours. And as a byproduct of those choices, the software had accrued so much technical debt that it was impossible to estimate. Because every single time somebody went in, they got surprised by something difficult. Nobody told him that. So he was getting deadlines that he would go to the board and they would actually tell Wall Street, oh, we're going to have all of these features done for this new customer thing by September. And it was never going to happen because nobody had any idea. He had a lot at stake. So we had to tell him. And again, there was no blame. The history was a history. The world was a world, and we had to deal with it. But we've got to align them on the outcomes, the required changes, and the trade-offs organizationally, because they have a lot at stake in this. And you have to rationalize the org structure. I work a lot in org structure stuff, which doesn't mean reorgs. Everybody hates a reorg. I actually am reorg agnostic. Scrum teams, to me, exist inside an organization, so I don't look at management at all. But I do want to look at, do we actually have whole teams? Have I hired enough people? If I have not enough designers and I have a flurry of engineers and nobody to actually help make sure what we're building is beautiful, maybe that's not going to be right, and look at those things. And then I have to look at incentives. Most companies incentivize heroics. Most companies will thank you for going the extra mile and send out an email or a Slack message to reward that person who worked a weekend, who saved the day, and that needs to change. What we need to do is thank people for getting out at a normal time on Friday and coming back on Monday with fresh new ideas every single week. Second thing I want to talk about is this cross-functional team. So this works exceedingly well on Scrum teams, and this has to work on your transformation team. And it should exist forever. So I want to see a team of every single stakeholder that is required in order to see this company transform. It generally starts in tech and products, but as a company starts to really explode out their agility, it tends to bring in other people. So I talked about Salesforce in 2008 having to change the way they sell. We had to actually bring in people from customer success because now we had to ready people and think about it in a whole life cycle. That's this team. And this becomes part of their jobs. This isn't like an extra volunteer effort that they're doing on the side, and they're gold against it. But they're going to figure out all the constraints that we're going to give to people because they're going to know how to measure whether they help, hurt, or make people unhappy. Then you make obstacles visible. This is a list of common ones. It doesn't matter what they are. No matter where you are in a transformation, passive transformation, just always make ugly things visible because they're not scary when they're visible and somebody's going to work on them. Salesforce, we had like the equivalent of a Slack channel called airing of grievances. The person who started that channel almost got fired. And what we did was, it was not anonymous. Sometimes people complained about scratchy toilet paper. Sometimes they complained about something that was really important, like we're starting to see people leave the company that we love and care about. You have to make that stuff visible. And as an executive team, we're actually accountable for resolving those issues. Just make it visible. Amplify successes, so positive examples build momentum. Reward collaboration, reward community, reward coaching over heroics, that's my countermeasure. And create connections to customer joy. Because everybody is actually trying to make somebody at the end who is the beneficiary of their work happy. Show them it, make it real. It'll activate them. Train everybody on Agile values and mindset, but give the mechanics into the teams. And push decision-making down to the lowest responsible level. And then finally, this is what I do in my Agile transformations. I pilot a lot, but my pilots are big. Because human beings don't react the way I expect, and the only way for me to know is to make a mistake and fix it. So I tend to be very, very iterative. I tend to experiment a lot with different things by giving people ideas and options and letting them try things in a safe zone and failing fast. And I'm always focused on customer outcomes around this. And the customer is not the executive. The customer is a human being who's at the end of it benefiting. So, final thoughts. There may be many transformations in your evolution, and that's okay. This is my new insight. Maybe the people who had had their hand up for past 5 years are actually the people who are the most wise, as long as they know it's intentional. Because our customers are changing, our business is changing, and our people are changing. So why wouldn't our Agile continuously adapt? Maybe that's why we have so many books out there, because we had to come up with new process. If that's the why, I'm okay with it. If it is, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and start from scratch over and over again, probably doesn't feel very good. But for me, you've got to remember the why on your journey. I want to create an environment where it's easy and joyful to do hard work, because our work is hard. And I want the results and the benefits to make us proud. And I feel like that, for me, is the point of reaching agility. So from the company perspective, they benefit from seeing the momentum change and have customers and new customers come and new revenue streams. I think, customers benefit by making the choice to pick what you do. But for the human beings inside the organization, they benefit by having work they're proud of, which is why they're coming to work every day. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we're going to have a couple of mics, if there are any. Or not, or you get 5 minutes back.